This is a demonstration of exercise 21-3B, Lessee Computations and Entries, Finance Lease with Guaranteed Residual Value. Trident Architects LP leases an automobile with a fair value of $32,000 from Hub City Motors Inc. on the following terms. It states that this is a non-cancelable term of 48 months. The rental payments of $600 per month are due at the beginning of each month, and the present value at 0.5% per month for all of the rental payments is $25,676. Trident has guaranteed the residual value of $7,000. The present value at 0.5% is $5,510, and Trident expects the probable residual value to be $7,000 at the end of the lease term. The estimated economic life of the automobile is 60 months, and Trident's incremental borrowing rate is 6% a year, which is equal to the 0.5% a month. Hub City's implicit rate is unknown. The instructions state in Part A what is the nature of this lease to Trident, and it is a financing lease. We don't see any mention in the lease of a transfer of ownership. We don't see any mention of a bargain purchase option. However, we can look to determine if it does meet the criteria for 75% of the lease term or 90% of the fair value of the automobile at the inception of the lease. So we know that the lease term is more than 75% of the estimated economic life. The lease term is 48 months, and if we divide that by 60 months for the economic life, that gives us 80%. So the lease term is over 75% of the economic life of the automobile. So it would meet that one condition, and it only has to meet one. But let's go ahead and look at the present value of the minimum lease payments to determine if they are greater than 90% of the fair value of the property. The problem gave us the present value of the rental payments at $25,676. It also gave us the present value of the guaranteed residual value. So we do have to include that because it's a guaranteed residual value. So we get the total of the rental payments and the residual value, and we compare that to the fair value of the automobile at the inception of the lease, which it told us was $32,000. So we see that it would have met that criteria because the present value is 97% of the fair value. So it would be a finance lease because it met both of those criteria, but it only has to meet one. The B portion states what is the present value of the lease payments to determine the lease liability. Well, again, the problem gave us the present value of the lease payments, which is $25,676. Because Trident believes that the automobile will be worth at least the $7,000 guaranteed residual value, they would not be required to include that present value or any portion of it in the lease liability. We'll see later on that that would change if they didn't believe it would be worth that amount. In the C portion, it says, based on the original fact pattern, record the lease on Trident's books at the date of commencement. So we know that we would record the right of use asset and the lease liability at the $25,676, which is the present value of the payments. Next, it states in the D part to record the first month's lease payment at the commencement of the lease. The problem stated that the lease payments are $600 and that they're due at the beginning of the month. So this is going to be an annuity due. So the first payment, the first $600 would be debited completely to the lease liability and credited to cash because there would be no interest due on the lease liability at that point. In the E portion, it says record the second month's lease payment. So to determine the interest, we would take the carrying value of the lease, which at this point would be $25,076 because we made one lease payment that went directly to the lease liability. And if we multiply that by 0.005, which is the 0.5%, we get $125 of interest expense rounded to the nearest dollar. The total payment is $600. So subtracting the interest expense gives us $475 that would be debited to the lease liability. And of course there would be an amortization schedule. We just aren't required to show that for this problem. So we would debit lease liability for $475. We would debit interest expense for $125 and credit cash for $600. The next entry in F states to record the first month's amortization on Trident's books, assuming that we're using straight line amortization. So we take the amount that we recorded for the right of use assets, $25,676. We divide that by the 48 months of lease term, and that gives us $535 of amortization expense per month. So we would debit amortization expense for $535 and credit the right of use asset for that amount. The G portion states, suppose that instead of $7,000, Trident expects the residual value to be only $4,000 and the guaranteed amount is still $7,000. How does the calculation of the present value of the lease payments change from Part B? So we know in the first portion it stated that we expected it to be worth $7,000, so we weren't required to include any of the present value of the guaranteed residual value in the lease liability. But now we're stating that we don't expect it to be worth $7,000. We only expect it to be worth $4,000. So that means we're going to probably have to make up that difference of $3,000. So first we're going to need to determine what is the present value of the $3,000. So we would look up in a table for 48 months and 0.5%, and we would determine that we would get a factor of 0.78710 for a present value of 1. Multiplying that by the $3,000, we would get $2,361 for the present value of the amount we expect to actually have to pay. So our lease liability would include the present value of the rental payments and the present value of the amount that we expect to owe at the end of the lease period for that guaranteed residual value. So instead of only recording $25,676 as the lease liability and the right of use asset, we would need to record $28,037. And that is the conclusion of the demonstration for exercise 21.3b.